The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club, sending crystal fragments across my worn sneakers. Marcus Wellington III stood there in his pristine navy blazer, his face twisted with the kind of disgust reserved for stepping in something unpleasant. "You actually thought you belonged here?" he said, his voice cutting through the classical music drifting from the ballroom. "Look at yourself, Sophia. Look at what you're wearing." I glanced down at my simple black dress, the only one I owned that wasn't from a thrift store. It had cost me 3 weeks of overtime at the diner, but standing next to the designer gowns and tailored suits of Boston's elite, it might as well have been burlap. "My family has standards," Marcus continued, straightening his gold cufflinks. "The Wellington name means something in this city. We can't have it associated with—" He gestured vaguely at me, as if I were some unfortunate stain on his reputation. What he didn't know was that in exactly 48 hours, I'd be walking into his father's law firm as the new senior partner, but that's getting ahead of myself. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 months earlier, I was hunched over my laptop in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner. The same booth where I'd been studying for the past 2 years. The red vinyl was cracked and patched with duct tape, and the fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds, but it was quiet enough to focus on my case studies. The smell of coffee and grease had become my study soundtrack. "Another refill, honey?" Dolores asked, holding up the coffee pot. She'd been working the night shift longer than I'd been alive, and her motherly concern had gotten me through more all-nighters than I could count. "Thanks, Dolores." I pushed my cup toward her, not looking up from the contract law textbook that had cost me a month's worth of tip. "How's the crowd tonight?" "Slow. Just you and that table of college boys who think they're too good for the coffee." She nodded toward a group of guys in expensive casual wear, the kind that screamed old money without trying. "One of them keeps looking over here." I finally glanced up and immediately wished I hadn't. A pair of striking blue eyes met mine across the diner. The guy was handsome in that effortless way that came with good genes and better health care. Dark hair that looked professionally styled even at midnight, a jawline that could cut glass, and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He stood up, and I quickly looked back down at my textbook, hoping he'd take the hint. I didn't. "Excuse me," came a voice like warm honey. "I'm Marcus Wellington." I looked up to find him standing beside my booth, hands in his pockets, looking genuinely nervous. It was disarming. "Sophia," I said simply, "I know this is probably weird, but I've seen you here a few times and I just had to come over." He gestured to the empty seat across from me. "Mind if I sit? Your friends are making fun of me for being too chicken to talk to you." Despite myself, I smiled. "They're not wrong. This is pretty chicken for you." He laughed, and it was genuine. "Fair enough. So, what's got you burning the midnight oil? Medical school? Law school? Law school? Suffolk University." I closed the textbook, suddenly self-conscious about its highlighted pages and margin notes. "You? Just finished at Harvard Business. My dad's been on my case about joining the family firm." He rolled his eyes. "Wellington and Associates. Maybe you've heard of it?" Everyone in Boston legal circles knew Wellington and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, but I kept my expression neutral. "Sounds fancy." "It is. Too fancy, if you ask me." He leaned forward and I caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Uncertainty, maybe. "What kind of law are you studying?" "Corporate law. Contract negotiation, mergers and acquisitions. That sort of thing." I'd chosen the specialty partly because it paid well, but mostly because it was where the real power lay. In corporate law, you didn't just argue cases, you shaped how business was done. "That's impressive. Suffolk's got a great program." He paused, then added, "My dad's always looking for smart lawyers." "I'm sure he is." I reopened my textbook, a subtle signal that our conversation was ending. "Thanks for the chat, Marcus." But he didn't leave. Instead, he slid into the booth across from me. "Can I buy you dinner?" "Real dinner, not diner food. There's this place in Back Bay. I'm working." I gestured to my books and the stack of flashcards beside them. "Some of us have to study." "Right. Of course." He stood up, looking embarrassed. "Maybe another time." I should have said no. I should have recognized the warning signs, the casual mention of his family's law firm, the assumption that I'd be impressed by Back Bay restaurants, the way he'd dismissed diner food like it was beneath him. But there was something about the way he'd laughed, the nervousness in his voice when he'd introduced himself, that made me think maybe he was different from the typical trust fund kids I'd encountered. Maybe, I said. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I'll take maybe. For the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular fixture at Murphy's Diner. He'd show up around 10 p.m., order coffee and pie, and sit in the booth across from mine while I studied. We'd talk during my breaks, about law school, about his reluctance to join his father's firm, about everything except the obvious differences in our backgrounds. He was funny in a way that surprised me, self-deprecating about his privileged upbringing without being performatively humble. He made jokes about his mother's obsession with charity galas, and his father's tendency to turn every conversation into a business strategy session. He seemed genuinely interested in my opinions about cases, asking thoughtful questions that showed he was actually listening. "You're going to make an incredible lawyer," he said one night, after I'd walked him through a particularly complex merger case I'd been studying. "The way you see angles that other people miss, that's rare." I felt myself warming to him despite my better judgment. "What about you? What do you actually want to do if not join the family firm?" He was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into his coffee. "I've always wanted to do something that mattered, not just making rich people richer, you know, maybe nonprofit work, or public interest law, something that actually helps people." It was the first time I'd heard him talk about his own ambitions, rather than his family's expectations. "Why don't you?" "Because I'm Wellington." He said it like it explained everything. And maybe it did. "My great-grandfather started that firm with nothing but determination and a law degree from night school. My grandfather built it into what it is today. My father's been grooming me to take over since I was old enough to understand what a contract was. And you're just going to do what they want? What choice do I have?" He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw past the expensive clothes and easy confidence to something more vulnerable underneath. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just walk away from all of it, start over somewhere new." "You could," I said quietly. "You could do anything you want." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Easy for you to say. You've built everything yourself. You don't have 3 generations of expectations breathing down your neck." I wanted to tell him that having nothing to lose was its own kind of prison, that working 3 jobs to pay for law school while living in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls wasn't exactly freedom. But I kept quiet. We came from different worlds, and maybe that was part of what made our midnight conversations feel so safe. Neither of us had to pretend to be something we weren't. Or so I thought. After 6 weeks of late-night coffee and increasingly personal conversations, Marcus finally asked me out properly, not for Back Bay dinner or some exclusive club, but for a Saturday afternoon walk through the public garden. "I want to see you in daylight," he said, grinning. "Make sure you're not some beautiful vampire who only exists in diners after midnight." I said yes, even though something in my chest tightened at the word beautiful. I'd been called a lot of things in my life, but beautiful wasn't usually one of them. Smart, determined, stubborn, those were the words that followed me around. Beautiful felt dangerous, like something that could disappear as quickly as it had appeared. But when Saturday came, and I saw Marcus waiting by the pond in perfectly fitted jeans and a cashmere sweater, I let myself believe that maybe this time would be different. Maybe I'd found someone who saw past the surface, who valued substance over status. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. The public garden in autumn was like stepping into a postcard. Golden leaves drifted down from the oak trees, and couples strolled hand in hand along the winding path. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, dark jeans, a cream sweater I'd splurged on at Marshall's, and my only pair of boots that weren't completely worn through. Nothing flashy but clean and presentable. Marcus was already waiting by the swan boats, looking like he'd stepped out of a catalog. His smile when he saw me was warm and genuine, the same one that had convinced me to trust him over the past month and a half. "You look beautiful," he said, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest. We walked for hours talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his college rowing team, and I shared stories about growing up in Southie with my grandmother after my parents died. He listened intently when I explained how I'd worked as a waitress, a tutor, and a weekend cleaning lady to save enough for law school. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "You're incredible," he said as we sat on a bench, overlooking the pond. "I've never met anyone so determined. I've never met anyone who actually cares about what I have to say," I replied, and meant it. Most people heard Suffolk Law and waitress and immediately wrote me off. Marcus saw past all that. Or so I thought. "Sophia," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. Here it comes, I thought. The girlfriend went back home, the engagement to some society princess, the revelation that this was all just him slumming it for kicks. "I'm falling for you," he said, instead. "Hard. And I know we come from different worlds, but I think we could make this work." Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Marcus, I know it's crazy. We've known each other for 6 weeks and most of that has been in a diner at midnight, but I've never felt this way about anyone." I looked at him sitting there, autumn light playing across his features, and let myself believe that maybe fairy tales could happen to girls like me. "I'm falling for you too." He kissed me then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when I kissed him back. It tasted like possibility and felt like coming home. For the next 2 months, we were inseparable. Marcus would pick me up after my shifts at the diner, and we'd drive around Boston talking about our future. He'd sit in the back of my corporate law classes, taking notes and asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested in what I was learning. I'd help him with his applications to nonprofit organizations, editing his essays about wanting to make a difference. He met my study group, a diverse collection of night students who were all working their way through law school. He fit in better than I'd expected, joking around with Tony, who drove a city bus during the day, and debating constitutional law with Maria, who cleaned offices downtown. "Your boyfriend's all right," Tony said after Marcus left one evening. "Doesn't act like he's better than us." If only I'd known how much acting was involved. The first crack in our perfect romance came on a Tuesday in November. I was running late for our dinner date because Professor Williams had held me after class to discuss an internship opportunity. "There's a position opening up at Hartwell and Associates," he'd said. "Corporate law, exactly what you're interested in. It's unpaid, but the experience would be invaluable. I'd like to recommend you." Hartwell and Associates was a mid-sized firm with a solid reputation, not as prestigious as Wellington and Associates, but exactly the kind of place where someone like me could build a career. I was practically vibrating with excitement when I met Marcus at the small Italian restaurant in the North End. "You'll never guess what happened," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Professor Williams wants to recommend me for an internship at Hartwell and Associates." Marcus looked up from his menu, and something flickered across his face too quickly for me to interpret. "That's great, babe. Really great. You don't sound excited." "No, I am. It's just..." He set down his menu and leaned forward. "Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation? I mean, long term? Build a career in corporate law. Work my way up to partner eventually. Why? It's just a lot of hours. A lot of stress. Don't you want to have a family someday?" I stared at him. "Are you seriously asking me to choose between my career and hypothetical future children?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was careful. "I've been thinking about us, about our future, and I think you're amazing, Sophia. You're smart and driven, and beautiful, but sometimes I wonder if we want the same things." "What things?" "I don't know. Stability, a home, the kind of life where we can actually spend time together instead of both of us working 80-hour weeks." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "You mean the kind of life where I depend on you financially?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." I stood up, my appetite completely gone. "I need to go." "Sophia, wait." But I was already walking away, my heels clicking against the restaurant's tile floor. Outside, The November air was sharp and cold, matching the sudden chill in my chest. Marcus caught up with me on the sidewalk. That came out wrong. You meant that you want a girlfriend who doesn't have her own ambition. Someone who'll be content to let you be the successful one while I play the supportive wife. That's not fair, isn't it? I turned to face him, and in the glow of the streetlights he looked like a stranger. You've been so supportive of my career, but the moment it becomes real, suddenly you're worried about work-life balance and family planning. I'm trying to be practical. No, you're trying to manage me. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was past care. You want to date the scrappy law student who's working her way up from nothing, but you don't actually want to deal with the ambition and drive that got me here. He ran his hands through his hair, looking frustrated. Can we just go back inside and talk about this like adults? I think we just did. I walked to the T station alone, my mind racing. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he just expressed himself poorly. But something about the conversation felt like a preview of every argument we'd have for the rest of our relationship. Him trying to subtly redirect my ambitions, me fighting to hold on to the dreams I'd worked so hard to build. The next day, Marcus showed up at Murphy's diner with flowers and an apology. He'd been out of line. He said he was proud of my ambition and wanted to support my career in whatever way he could. He'd just been nervous about the intensity of his feelings for me, and it had come out all wrong. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could bridge the gap between our worlds through sheer force of will and genuine affection. So I accepted his apology, and we fell back into our routine of late-night conversations and stolen kisses. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way he'd changed the subject when I talked about my career goals. The subtle suggestions that maybe I was pushing myself too hard. The way he'd grown quiet when I mentioned the networking events I'd started attending. The second crack came 3 weeks later when he invited me to a party at his friend's apartment in Beacon Hill. I'd been excited about meeting his social circle, about seeing how we fit together outside the safe bubble of the diner, and our private date. The apartment was everything I'd expected. High ceilings, exposed brick, furniture that cost more than my annual tuition. The people were exactly what I'd feared. Polished, confident, speaking in the casual shorthand of shared privilege. Everyone, this is Sophia, Marcus announced, his arm around my waist. Sophia, this is everyone. The introductions were a blur of names and handshakes. Harvard Law, Boston College, family connections to judges and politicians. I smiled and nodded, feeling increasingly like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. So Sophia, said a blonde woman whose jewelry probably cost more than my car, what do you do? I'm finishing my law degree at Suffolk. I replied. Oh, how nice. Are you thinking about public interest work? There it was. The assumption that someone like me wouldn't be aiming for the upper echelons of corporate law, that my background naturally suited me for less prestigious, lower-paying work. Actually, I'm focusing on corporate law, mergers and acquisitions. The woman's smile faltered slightly. Oh, well, that's ambitious. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Around us, conversations resumed, but I felt like I was trapped in a fishbowl being observed and found wanting. Marcus squeezed my hand. Sophia's brilliant, he said. Top of her class. But even his defense felt patronizing. Like he was surprised by my intelligence rather than proud of it. The evening went downhill from there. Every conversation felt like a test I was failing. When I mentioned working at the diner, the responses ranged from pity to barely concealed disgust. When I talked about my grandmother's house in Southie, they exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of my neighborhood. By the time we left, I felt raw and exposed, like I'd been turned inside out and examined under a microscope. That was fun, Marcus said as we walked to his car. Everyone loved you. I stared at him, wondering if we'd attended the same party. Did we experience the same evening? What do you mean? Marcus, your friends spent the entire night treating me like I was some kind of exotic zoo animal. The only thing they were missing was taking photos. You're being dramatic. Am I? I stopped walking and turned to face him. Your friend Catherine literally asked me if I'd ever been to Martha's Vineyard, and when I said no, she said she couldn't imagine growing up without summer houses. Catherine's just, she doesn't mean anything by it. And when I mentioned my grandmother, Brad asked if I'd ever considered moving to a nicer neighborhood. To my face, Marcus, he asked if I'd ever considered leaving the only home I've ever known because it wasn't good enough for him. Marcus was quiet, and in that silence I heard everything he wasn't saying. You're embarrassed by me, I said quietly. That's not true. Then why didn't you defend me? Why did you just stand there while your friends treated me like I was some charity case you'd picked up? Sophia, you're reading too much into this. No, I'm finally reading enough. We drove back to my apartment in silence, and when he pulled up to the curb I didn't invite him upstairs. Instead, I sat in his passenger seat, looking at the building where I'd lived for 2 years, seeing it through his friend's eyes, the chipped paint, the fire escape that doubled as a balcony, the lack of a doorman or even a decent lobby. I think we need to take a break, I said finally. Sophia, please, don't let one bad night. It's not one bad night, Marcus. It's what that night showed me about us. About what you really think of me. I got out of the car and walked to my building without looking back. Behind me, I heard his car idling at the curb for a long moment before finally pulling away. That night, I sat in my tiny studio apartment, surrounded by law books, and the dreams I'd built from nothing, and wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I should have tried harder to fit in with his world. But deep down I knew the truth. Marcus Wellington III was slumming it with the poor girl from Southie, and sooner or later he was going to want to go home to his real life. A life where I would never truly belong. What I didn't know was that in 2 months, I'd discover just how wrong I was about who belonged where. 2 months after our breakup, I was a different person. The internship at Hartwell and Associates had turned into a full-time job offer before I'd even graduated. My thesis on corporate merger strategies had caught the attention of several major firms, and suddenly I was fielding calls from headhunters who'd never given me a second glance before. But the real game changer came on a Thursday morning in March, when I walked into the conference room at Hartwell and Associates to find 3 men in $1,000 suits waiting for me. Miss Chen, said the oldest of the 3, extending his hand. I'm Robert Blackstone, managing partner at Blackstone, Hayes and Morrison. I nearly dropped my coffee. Blackstone, Hayes and Morrison wasn't just any firm. They were the firm. The kind of place where Supreme Court justices started their careers, and billion-dollar deals were made over lunch. We've been watching your work, said the second man, introducing himself as David Hayes. Your analysis of the Meridian Tech Corp merger was brilliant. You identified liability issues that 3 other firms missed. We'd like to offer you a position, Blackstone continued. Senior Associate, Corporate Mergers and Acquisitions. Starting salary is $250,000, plus bonuses. I stared at them, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry. Did you say senior associate? We don't believe in wasting time, said the third man, James Morrison. You've already proven you can do the work. We're prepared to fast-track you to partner if you continue to perform at this level. The offer was beyond anything I'd dreamed of. Most law school graduates started as junior associates, spending years fetching coffee and doing research. They were offering me a chance to skip straight to the big leagues. There's one condition, Blackstone said. We need someone who can handle the Wellington account. My blood turned to ice. Wellington and Associates. They're one of our biggest clients. Old family firm. Very traditional. They've been resistant to some of our more progressive approaches. We think you might be exactly what they need. I thought about Marcus's father, the man who'd built an empire on old money connections and exclusivity. The irony was so sharp I could taste it. I accept, I said. 3 weeks later I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of One International Place, looking out over Boston Harbor. My secretary, I had a secretary, brought me coffee in actual china instead of paper cup. My business cards were thick, expensive cardstock that felt substantial in my hands. Sophia Chen, Senior Associate. corporate mergers and acquisitions. The first time I saw my name on the company directory, I took a picture and sent it to my grandmother. She called me crying, telling me how proud she was, how my parents would have been bursting with joy. But the real test came on a Friday afternoon when Blackstone called me into his office. The Wellington meeting is Monday, he said. They're considering a major acquisition, and they want our team to handle the legal work. It's $100 million deal, Sophia. Don't let them intimidate you. I thought about that conversation as I selected my outfit for the meeting. The navy Armani suit I'd bought with my first paycheck, the Louboutin heels that had cost more than I used to make in a month, the Cartier watch that had been my gift to myself for making senior associate. I wasn't the same girl who'd been humiliated at that Beacon Hill party. I'd transformed myself into exactly the kind of woman who belonged in Marcus's world. Successful, polished, powerful. But I wasn't prepared for what happened when I walked into the Wellington and Associates conference room on Monday morning. Marcus was there, sitting at the far end of the mahogany table in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked exactly the same. The same perfect hair, the same blue eyes, the same confident smile, until he saw me. The color drained from his face, his pen slipped from his fingers, and clattered onto the table. Sophia, he whispered. Good morning, Marcus, I said calmly, taking my seat at the opposite end of the table. It's nice to see you again. His father, William Wellington II, looked between us with curiosity. You two know each other? We dated, I said simply. Briefly, the meeting proceeded like a choreographed dance. I presented our acquisition strategy with the kind of confidence that came from knowing I was the smartest person in the room. I fielded questions about liability structures and tax implications with ease. I watched Marcus struggle to concentrate on the presentation while stealing glances at me. Impressive work, Miss Chen, William Wellington said after I'd finished. Your reputation precedes you. Thank you, Miss Wellington. I look forward to working with your firm on this acquisition. After the meeting, Marcus cornered me in the hallway outside the conference room. Sophia, I need to talk to you. I don't think that's appropriate. We have a professional relationship now. Please, just 5 minutes. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, uncertainty, the kind of vulnerability that came from realizing you'd made a catastrophic mistake. 5 minutes, I said. He led me to a small office down the hall and closed the door behind us. For a moment, we just stood there, looking at each other across the space that felt like a canyon. You look incredible, he said finally. Thank you. I mean it. You're everything I always knew you could be. I raised an eyebrow. Everything you knew I could be. That's interesting, considering you never seemed to believe in my potential when we were together. That's not true, isn't it? I moved closer, and he backed up against the door. You spent our entire relationship trying to convince me to lower my expectations, to be satisfied with less, to make myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I was young, I was stupid. I didn't know how to handle having feelings for someone so what? Marcus, so poor, so beneath your social class. He flinched like I'd slapped him. I never said that. You didn't have to. Your actions said it for you. I straightened my jacket, a gesture that drew his attention to the expensive cut of my suit. You want to know something funny? That night at your friend's party when they were all looking down on me, I thought I was the one who didn't belong. I thought I was the imposter. Sophia. But I wasn't the imposter, Marcus. You were. You were pretending to be someone who could see past money and status when really you were just as shallow as the rest of them. The only difference was that you were better at hiding. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything that had been left unsaid 2 months ago. I know I messed up, he said quietly. I know I hurt you, but seeing you now, seeing what you've become, it makes me realize what I lost. What have I become? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus, I haven't become anything. I've always been exactly who I am right now. The only thing that's changed is that now I have the clothes and the job title to prove it. I was intimidated by you, he said suddenly. By your drive, your intelligence, Your determination. I'd never met anyone who worked so hard for everything they had. It made me feel like a fraud. So you decided to tear me down instead of building yourself up. I never meant. You meant every word. I moved toward the door, but he stepped in front of me. Can we try again? I'm different now. I've learned. Have you? I looked at him steadily. Because from where I'm standing you look exactly the same. Same expensive suit. Same family connections. Same assumption that you can have whatever you want just by asking nicely. That's not fair. Fair. I felt something cold and sharp rise in my chest. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what happened after you walked away from me. I began to pace. And he pressed himself against the door like he was afraid I might bolt. I threw myself into my work. I studied 18 hours a day. I networked with people who actually recognized my potential instead of being threatened by it. I built relationships with mentors who saw me as more than just a charity case from the wrong side of town. Sophia, I never. And you know what I realized? I realized that I'd been trying to make myself smaller to fit into your world when what I should have been doing was building my own world. A world where I didn't have to apologize for my ambition, or my background or my dreams. I stopped pacing and faced him directly. So when you ask if we can try again, what you're really asking is whether I'm willing to shrink myself back down to the size you're comfortable with, and the answer is no. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw the boy from the diner. The one who'd talked about wanting to make a difference, who'd seemed genuinely interested in my opinions and dreams. I loved you, he said quietly. No, I replied. You loved the idea. You loved having a girlfriend who made you feel noble and progressive. You loved the story you could tell about dating someone from a different background, but you never loved me. That's not true. If you'd loved me, you would have defended me at that party. If you'd loved me, you would have celebrated my ambitions, instead of trying to limit them. If you'd loved me, you would have seen me as an equal instead of a project. The words hung in the air between us, final and devastating. What happens now? He asked. Now we have a professional relationship. You're the client. I'm the lawyer. We work together to complete this acquisition. And then we go back to our separate lives. And that's it? That's it. I reached for the door handle, but he caught my wrist gently. For what it's worth, he said. I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then back up at his face. You're right. I did deserve better. And now I have it. I pulled my hand free and walked out of the office, leaving him standing there alone. The acquisition deal went through flawlessly. Wellington and Associates became one of our firm's most valuable clients, and I was promoted to junior partner 6 months later. I bought a penthouse in Back Bay, the same neighborhood where I'd once felt so out of place, and filled it with art and books and everything I'd ever dreamed of having. Sometimes I saw Marcus at legal events around the city. We'd nod politely, exchange pleasantries and move on. He eventually married a woman from a prominent Boston family, someone who fit perfectly into his world without having to transform herself to do it. As for me, I kept building my own world, one where success was measured not by who you knew or where you came from, but by how hard you were willing to work for your dreams. And in that world, I was exactly who I was meant to be. The girl who'd once been told she was too poor for his family had become the woman who was too successful to care about his opinion, and that, I realized, was the best kind of victory there was. Some stories end with the couple getting back together. This one ends with something better, with a woman who learned that the only approval she needed was her own, and the only limitations that mattered were the ones she refused to accept. The champagne glass might have shattered that night at the country club, but I'd done something far more powerful. I'd proven that I belonged anywhere I chose to be. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest upload.